Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, you are most welcome. We are delighted that you could be with us here today. My name is Tony Maroney. I'm a member of the steering committee of the Digital Transformation Lab. From our perspective, we're absolutely thrilled that so many people from all over the world can join our live discussion and debate on nurturing digital mindsets and cultures. We've no set agenda, but we do have a really great panel. We have just under an hour to get into what is probably, to my mind, the most important subject in digital transformation. We are recording the session, so it will be available to you at a later date. In the meantime, please feel free to use chat and Q&A, and we'll try to deal with as many questions as we can before we finish today. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and in that briefly also explain their interest in this subject. So Eleanor, maybe I could start with you.
Sure, this is Eleanor Doyle here. Thanks so much, Tony, for inviting me to the discussion today. I'm a professor of economics here in Cork University Business School, and one of my research interests is in clustering and collaboration. And that, I think, feeds very well into the themes we're talking about today, because ultimately, in terms of digital, collaboration is fundamental. So that's one reason why I'm really interested in the discussions today. The second reason is I've been working now for a number of years with a number of practitioners on a developmental doctorate program, which integrates personal, professional, and organizational development. And while that focus isn't 100% on the digital transformation space, the notion of transformation fundamentally is the foundation of that program. So in those two ways, I'm delighted to be invited here.
Great. Well, we look forward to hear what you have to say. Fiona, how about you?
Hi, Tony. Thanks again for inviting me to this session today. Yes, so my name is Fiona O'Carroll. My background is in GM commercial product development roles in technology businesses, about over 25 years now, in working with different companies of different sizes, all the way from startup through to traditional companies being disrupted by technology, both here in Ireland, and I've also worked in the US. So in the last 15 years, I've been heavily in the C-level, executive committee, board level, reporting to the board. So that's given me a very particular lens that I have on digital transformation. And my interest is really around this niggling problem that we just keep seeing, that 75% or more of the efforts we put into digital transformation fail, and I'm in pursuit of the why, because I've worked with amazing people in amazing companies, and I know it's nothing to do with IQ. So it's to do with something else. So that's brought me to my current focus, which I call the digital mindset. And what is that? So we'll talk about it in more detail as we go along, but over the last 4 or 5 years, I've done major research in the area of mindsets and how they actually influence our behavior. So they sit before culture. So I've combined that research with actually the knowledge that people need to be able to do business in the digital era. So I'm quite focused on the leadership development level. So it is leadership because I believe it's top down. So it needs to start there. And so I've combined both the mindsets with the knowledge. There's a new body of knowledge that executives need if they've been operating in the industrial era, which all traditional businesses have been. So it's that knowledge plus the mindsets, and combine those. And that's what the digital mindset is to me.
Cool. Great, thank you. Jeremy.
Thanks, Tony. Great to also be with Eleanor and Fiona. Fiona, I was interested in what you said about leadership. In a nutshell, my work these days is around working with organizations to explore strengths-based collaboration at scale in a digital world. And I think that key word is at scale. And my background originally is human resource management. I was very fortunate to be involved in what I call front end, which was starting up the internet in Australia, in Telstra, MobileNet. And I've watched in the last 20 years this issue around employee engagement, where we've seen such a low engagement level, which for many years has been discretionary because managers have been allowed to get away with low levels of engagement because really in the industrial model, it doesn't matter, because the focus in the industrial model is on the machine and the assets in the factory, not on people. And I've tried to understand where the technology is going. So in my writing, but with my work with organizations, I try and understand the connection between people and technology now. And the one big thing I see about the tech is that it's moving beyond systems integration into what we might call convergence. So convergence is the idea of going back to the wholeness of things. And whilst the technology is leading with convergence, the way we're organizing our work and our structures and our very sense of what it means to contribute is not converged. It's still siloed, it's still broken, it's still the industrial model. I was taught in HR, my very first day in HR, a very long time ago, 40 years ago, that it's all about the job, not about the individual, not about the person. So we've only taken a fraction of people into the workplace. And now with COVID, we're seeing a pivot back into this idea that work is not just about a job, but it's about the sense of being an individual in community. So my contention is that, and I guess lastly, my interest has been in this idea of future of work, which I've been involved with for the last 7 or 8 years. And I believe the future of work starts with the individual. So one friend of mine in Silicon Valley a couple of years ago said to me, Jeremy, I was asking the question, what's the ultimate in digital? He said it's to put the tech and the data in the hands of every individual. And I said, yes, so that each individual can explore their personal why and to engage their personal why, #me, with the personal whys of others to create that story. So my argument or my suggestion is it's not actually about digital, it's about the story, and it starts with the individual. Digital is what is the tech that enables us to take that journey, but I think we've got to shift the conversation from starting with the tech itself into a conversation around who we are, why we exist, and what's our meaning on this earth.
Okay. Thank you, Jeremy. And it would be remiss of us not to acknowledge that it is kind of late in Melbourne, Australia. So thank you for staying up to participate in this discussion. So let's get straight into the heart of it. I mean, we called this session Digital Mindset and Digital Cultures. So, are these the same things? What do we mean by them? If they're not the same things, what is the difference? And then how would they relate to each other? So Fiona, you've already touched on this, so maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tony. Well, my perspective on it is that they're not the same, right? So I'll just give you my definition of them and why I think they're not the same. So mindset, well, let's just say what mindset is maybe first and then digital mindset. So the mindset, our mindset is the lens through which we process information from the world around us, and then the resulting action, thinking, behavior, right, that we have. So digital mindset for me is, again, my lens is leadership in traditional businesses being disrupted, right? So digital mindset for me combines the knowledge that what we need to understand about shifting from the industrial era to the digital era. If you are driving strategy in a company, it is fundamentally different. A step change has occurred. So there's a knowledge bank and there's a mindset, right, that you need to be able to effectively execute in this era. Those mindsets, there is a group of mindsets that have been heavily researched. My source for this is, her name is Dr. Carol Dweck. She's a professor in Stanford, and she wrote a book called The Growth Mindset. Hugely popular right now because, is it Satya Nadella? I probably said his name wrong. The CEO of Microsoft has totally transformed Microsoft using this growth mindset philosophy. So that's great timing for us because that's my own belief. So, but he's actually based it off her thinking as well. So it's about what's the mindset that I need to be able to effectively operate in the digital era. But I also need new knowledge. My old toolkit that I had in the industrial era, if I'm driving strategy, doesn't work anymore. And we can go into that in more detail. So that's digital mindset to me. Now, mindset, in my view, is ahead of culture, because culture to me is behavior and norms and stuff. How we do things around here inside the company is the culture. So, but it's the mindset that actually informs how we think and behave. It's like a filter and a lens before that. So they're very much partnered. I just see them in an order. I see mindset first and I see culture second, but they're absolutely partners of each other.
Super. Jeremy, where are you at on this?
I wonder why our paths have not crossed before, Fiona. It does start with mindsets, and I think one of the things I think about what Klaus Schwab, the chairman of the World Economic Forum, said 2 or 3 years ago. He said that the new tech is of such significance that it forces us to make a choice as leaders as to which path we take. Do we use the tech for good or for bad? Do we use it to continue? Do we use it to destroy even the good things about humanity, or do we use it to augment humanity? You know, I call that the two streams. So for me, it's not about the tech. That's not the first question, and the culture is not the first question. The first question is, who are we? What do we believe about the world and about people? You know, do we use the tech to continue the first stream conversation around work and business, which sees tech as being there to support the factory, to support the machine, to support the thing, where automation, for example, is about efficiency and cost for its own sake, where people don't matter. The second stream is where we have this opportunity to ask fundamental questions around what we believe about life and work and people. And are we going to use the tech to augment people? And are we going to recognize that there is a significant amount of diversity and talent and strengths, which we've not even tapped into yet? But if we have to take a different mindset about how we see people and how we see business and how we see life. And I think secondly, it's about our story. What story do we want to share? What is the story we want to create? With whom are we going to collaborate to make the world a better place? What difference will we make to humanity? And I think when we can start to shift into that conversation, it means a shift in leadership from leader as hero with the experts in the room to leader as host of a conversation with everybody in the room. And then when we do that, we can then say, what is the tech that we can use to have this conversation at scale, to make a difference at scale? So I think we're at a pivotal time now. And I think our role as digital disruptors perhaps is to challenge along those mindsets lines first, rather than the tech first.
Thanks, Jeremy. Eleanor, I'd like to bring you in on this as well. And there's a question that has come in here, which maybe you could pick up as well. Can you change culture without changing mindsets and vice versa? So maybe you can give us your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, okay. So as I was kind of mulling over this issue, I gave myself a version of the chicken and egg problem, which I think came first and which was more important and all of that. And I think there's general agreement in terms of, you know, what we understand by, at one level, digital mindset, you know, this connection between technology and the person. And fundamentally, you know, we're consumed by tech at the moment. And when I think about mindset and culture, I think at both levels, we're now talking about a turn towards values. And Jeremy has I think, articulated that as well, that the underlying assumptions of the individual and the underlying assumptions of organizations are coming much more to the fore, and even more than their assumptions, their purpose. So I think there's a huge demand in terms of the individual within their organizations to allow their values to be coherent with the organization. And there's quite a lot of developments in that space. But if I was to call it, and I think maybe later we can come back to perhaps the individual and the individual development piece, I think in order to bring about the type of change that we would like to see in our organizations around digital transformation, for me, the organizational piece is hugely important, because entering into an organization where the culture has this digital mindset, digital approach embedded within it, for me means that the values and the purpose of the organization are very clear, and that technology serves that purpose. And when the purpose is shared among the people in the organization, when, going back to Jeremy's idea as well of when people know why they exist within the organization, then you don't really have those conversations or those funny cartoons about, oh, you leave your brain and your heart outside as you go into work every day. You know, you're not at work. It's almost part of who you are. And that's hugely problematic because for a lot of us, a lot of the time, the person we're bringing into work is almost the fiction or the cover story or the pseudonym that we want to use in the professional space. And the organizations where that's not a requirement, they, for me, are part of the goal of the type of organization that we're talking about here, that has a purpose served by tech. I'm not sure if that exactly...
Oh, very good. Excellent. And look, there's plenty of great questions coming in. In fact, Fiona, one came in there about your 75% of digital transformations fail looking for sources of information. And I think Harvard and Forbes, both of them had stuff out in it. But if you have a source, maybe you could put it into the chat at some stage. But in that context, I suppose, Fiona, the question is, if you don't change the mindset and culture, can you succeed with digital transformation?
Well, I think the question, which is it actually about digital transformation or something else? Because I think it's actually about the fact that tech is opening up some deeper conversations around who we are, and you know, organizations have been the way in which we've organized work for a long time, and they've had a single enterprise focus, have they not? You know, and you switch off your life when you come into work, and vice versa. But there's now, you know, the tech is already in the hands of our young people. They're already wired for collaboration and wired for digital, and you know, and I think we're starting to see the idea of work as being lifelong communities. But it's not about the tech; it's about the story. It's about the why. And I think, you know, if you start with digital as a mantra that we have to go digital, then you end up with this kind of situation we saw 2 or 3 years ago, if I may speak a little bit out of school, where we dumped Yammer on people's desks and wondered why they didn't take it up, because someone had bought Yammer and we didn't start with the why. We didn't engage them in terms of the story. It's like Columbus, you know, when he got his first 200 people on a ship. He didn't say, look, this is the ship and this is the digital version of travel, whatever. He said, over there is the promised land. Would you like to come and find it with me? And so then they sort of worked out they needed to get a ship and needed to work out how to get there. And that, I think, is the hope that I see now in this conversation, that we can shift from the digital transformation, use it as an excuse to start the conversation, but move to a different one.
Interesting. Fiona, what do you think?
Yeah, my lens, obviously, I totally agree with what Jeremy's saying. And my lens is very specific because it's around the leadership in traditional organizations right now that were brought up in the industrial era, and they're needing to transform. So you could use the word rebirth, frankly, which would be broader than transform. Absolutely. It's that significant. It is actually core up out, right? So yes, I think you could use the word rebirth. But that is my lens now, so it's pretty focused on that view of the world. So you know, your question around, you know, mindset to culture to change, you know, I think that it's very difficult to have a significant sustainable cultural change, right? You can have a sort of a lipstick culture change, you know, that one, right? Absolutely. And you can have a kind of one, right? Half-baked-ish versus full-blown, if you haven't dealt with mindset. Now, the mindset I'm talking about is leaderships, right? Obviously, that's my area of focus, which then trickles down the organizations. There's no question. It must start at the top in a traditional organization. Right, so that's my view, and then I think you can have sustainable cultural change, which brings enormous benefit and brings you to where Jeremy is. You know, it takes you, as Jeremy's saying, there's a road. It takes you to be able to have those conversations. But I think, yeah, there's an order of priority in my view.
Okay, good. Eleanor, just bring you in. There's a question that's coming here from Janet in terms of cultural competence is a key factor, and that employees, consumers need to develop all of these for an online environment. And is that something that you have looked at?
I've looked at diversity in different shapes and forms in terms of how it contributes, not only because we know it is the right way to be in the world and in our organizations, but because increasingly now the research is pointing in that direction. And I'm thinking in particular of a workshop that a Cork woman here, Claire Kennelly, did for some of my master's students last year. And we focus in particular on diversity as it related to disability. And increasingly, once you start scratching the surface of diversity, all of the kind of, I will say, the old-fashioned views of these changes being, adding costs onto an organization, that view is slowly but surely disappearing. And that if we know that the right thing to do in life should be the same in an organization, that is to celebrate the diversity that is there, to appreciate what people can do as opposed to what they cannot, then diversity is a given. Intercultural is slightly different. I think it's more feeding into the business models and the need to appreciate market varieties that being a native person from a particular geography can actually help with. So for me, that's almost the easiest argument to make. You want to add different flavors onto whatever it is that you're serving to a particular market. Absolutely. The more local knowledge you have, the better.
Okay. Well, one of the questions coming in here is in terms of SMEs. So they might have the mindset and culture, but maybe not the knowledge around the technologies. Is that something that you've come across, and how do the SMEs deal with this issue? See Jeremy nodding there.
Well, actually, my digital awakening came with an SME, not a big corporate. It came with my mushroom farm story. It was with 60 people, where I deploy appreciative inquiry, the strengths-based whole system in the room, to switch the lens from a problem to an affirmative topic. And also, by the way, digital is the best of digital mindsets. It's not about solving a problem, but about actually switching the lens to growth and what gives life to people, how we can experience more life. But in the mushroom farm, they were being hammered by a price war between the supermarkets, and we were due to get the 60 odd people in the room on a Saturday morning, and the CEO rang me in a panic to say that his mushrooms had been slashed from $28 to $16 a kilo overnight. And it was great. That was bad, but it was great to have 60 people in the room. First time he'd done it on a Saturday morning, including young Thai women going to university, but being hired to pick mushrooms in their spare time with their hands, and young African Somali labourers who were refugees, who were also using their hands but not the head of their heart. And he said, let's spend the whole day getting their ideas of taking out cost. Let's spend, and I thought, interesting. And I said to him, I want you to imagine it's 25 years from now, and you've got your beautiful grandchild on your knee, and she looks up to you and she says, Papa, you did something amazing with your life. She won't use these words, but if you can imagine if she says something like this, and you say, yes, sweetheart. She said, what was it? And he said, sweet. And you look down to her and you say, sweetheart, I spent my whole life taking out cost. Is that why you exist? And I asked him a question. What is it you really care about? Mindset shift. What is the one time you thought your mushrooms could make a big difference to the world? What is it? And he said he and his wife have this passion about reducing obesity levels in children in Australia. What if the mushrooms could get to the kids, and how could we do that? So we used that as a topic to open up the Appreciative Inquiry Summit Room. And in a nutshell, they came back and they presented, they did design prototypes of how they got the mushrooms into the schools through developing the world's first coloured mushroom growing kits for kids. Mm-hmm. And it was the young Thai women who ran out of the room, got their iPhones and said, we have mobile app and we have digital analytics. And we have a social movement, which from that, I got the idea of the social room, which is also being a social native, not just a digital native, creating the story. But it was that mushroom farm experience where these young people talking about their passion for a story and showing the older folk about how to use an iPhone But I began to understand that if you can get the story, so any SME, the answer is bring your people together. Switch the conversation from a problem and from surviving into a shared vision for a co-created better world, and then say, how can the tech take us there?
Yeah, good, excellent, yes, thank you. Fiona, a question that's just come in here that you might like to answer, which is, how do you develop what does a mindset that is effective look like, and how do you know when it exists across an organization?
Yeah, good, very good question. So if you think of, maybe just to back up a little bit about the challenge of moving from the industrial era to the digital era, again, my view is at a strategic level. So just to give it that perspective, you know, the huge challenges are that, to Jeremy's point, it's not actually the technology, it's really what is the technology enabled that is fundamentally changing how we do business. So the big core of that is that it's connected, collective intelligence. I mean, if you were to boil it down, everything's going to be connected, and therefore we're going to have ubiquitous data like we never had in the history of the human race, frankly. So how I do business is totally changing, right? I have to compete in, I'm going to play, instead of in the industrial model, it was all command and control, you know, linear model, customer, manufacturer, supply chain in the middle, you know, very linear, economies of scale. Anybody who went to business school, it would have been Porter's 5 forces and all this stuff, right? Totally redundant, absolutely irrelevant. And I hope they stopped teaching it in business school. Totally irrelevant in the digital era, right? Because now you're going to be in ecosystems with other companies, and the underlying thing we're all sharing and co-creating value around is data, right? Which enables us to have new products, new services, etc., etc. So we're also, you'll know, no longer competing in industries, because it's more like arenas now, because, you know, who can show up now in your backyard that was never in your classic definition of industry, which was we all look the same, we all kind of do the same thing, and we're called an industry. But that's gone, because we can see all kinds of companies showing up elsewhere, right? So even competitive advantage, right, is gone really. It'll be transient competitive advantage. It's no longer what we thought in the industrial era. So when you think about the mindset of a leader in the industrial era, if we go back to the research I spoke about, which is 30 years old, it's extensively deep around, there's a set of mindsets, when I'm just going to focus for the example here to answer the question onto, which is from the Carl Drake work, which is a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So a growth mindset is all about, I want to learn and grow. And a fixed mindset is, I want to look good. Now, when you translate that at the executive level or any level, that's just my area of focus, you would be amazed. Like if you ask anyone right now, do you have a growth mindset? They're going to say, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Of course, I want to grow and learn. But in fact, you know, as human beings, we're very driven by fear and insecurity. And so is the C-level, by the way, right? Because we have them in this kind of little glass case, but they're the same. So depending on how they, as we went back to mindset, process information from the world around them and make decisions how to act, it can be very, very different. So now let's go to the world of digital, right? And actually this is transformation anyway, but now we're challenged with, we need to look at the world differently, right? We need to be able to be hugely adaptable. We're going to have to grow and learn. We might have to use the word fail, get something wrong, and not self-protect, which we would have, you know, the fixed mindset wants to do. So to succeed in any transformation, but my area is digital transformation, you are going to have a growth mindset. There is absolutely no way you're going to succeed without it. So if we can identify at the top that we do or don't, it's a continuum, obviously it's a continuum. It's hugely based on context. Like I might in one context, if I was in company A as a person, have a growth mindset. And in company B, I may end up having a fixed mindset because of the environment I'm in. So it is very context driven, but let's assume I'm in the context where we identify, actually we have a fixed mindset, in the main, a collective, more fixed than growth at the C level. we now have identified what I believe is a fundamental flaw in why we're not executing the digital transformation. So now we've pinpointed something, and it's not exclusively that, I'm just saying this is, I think, a critical component, and we can now take action to address that. And then we can actually flow that down through the organization, right? So we have to match the mindset, of which there's a few. I've just there's 4 that I just highlighting the growth one because it's a really important one. So we match the mindset with the business challenge. We need to make sure we have it in place, and then we need to cascade it down through the organization. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, excellent. Eleanor, maybe just picking up on that, and there's a question that has come in for you, which is right on the money for this discussion here, is how big an issue is constrained thinking in an organization, and how do you deal with it?
Mm-hmm. I guess constrained thinking. In one sense, again, I don't want to be trite in responding to the question. I think there's no limit to the ideas that people can have in an organization. No limit. You know, I go into a classroom, business people, undergrads, a bit tougher to get information out of undergrads, but in business people, there's no bounds to the number of good ideas that can come through, I think, when the context is right. But sometimes the challenge, and I'm thinking now, say, of MBA type groups or whatever, when you say, right, what would happen now if you take those ideas back and try and socialize them in your organization? Quite often you see the shiftiness in the seat, and lads know that works here in the classroom, but you know, I'm not going to take that back to work with me. I've seen that over and over again. So what is it that constrains that? I think, to be fair, Fiona has identified issues in the language of the growth and the fixed mindset. And there are all other types of approaches that identify the problem. She also has pointed to something that I think is part and parcel of what we know happens now in today's organizations. You have this sharing of the leadership much faster than used to be the traditional approach. So people are moving from organization to organization. The leadership of organizations are moving around. The leaders, if we think in terms of the organizations, the top, whatever you want to take, Forbes 500 or even smaller groups, that leadership is changing now faster than it ever did before. So there's an awful lot of more churn going on in business. And that for me says, if you have all that chopping and changing, people aren't happy with the way that their organizations are structured. So how do we help them get out of that constrained way of thinking? A very simple way for me, and it kind of relates to getting around these cognitive biases that, again, you know, are very interesting to read about, but kind of often leave you with the so what, that we know all this more about how we think as individuals. And that is to get people actually working in groups and making public their views in reasonable and reasoned ways, supportive, directed, as I think Jeremy has said as well, you know, to solution rather than output or product focus. What is it for, and even product or problem identification, those types of processes. Because when you make your ideas public and they're shared and discussed and debated, an awful lot of those biases that may constrain our thinking, they just get blown away. So collaboration, supportive, guided, for me, that makes a big change.
Great.
Can I come in on that? So just on both those themes there. First of all, growth. I think the nature of growth is different now. I think it's not just about money or profit. It's profit as a force for good. You know, I'm very passionate about the young workforce members coming in now. I call them Generation G, wired for globalization, co-generation, generosity. They care about the world. They care about sustainable global topics. They also care about the homeless in their streets. So I think part of leadership now, the mindset shifted to see growth in the context of how growth serves humanity, not just takes from humanity. And I think secondly, in terms of constraints, I think digital at its best is shifting us from continuous improvement to innovation. And innovation requires bringing the non-usual suspects into the room. We know that innovation at its best involves bringing different people. I remember having the privilege 2 years ago of doing some of this thinking with the NHS leadership team in Manchester, and their traditional thinking was let's get the doctors and nurses together. But what about the people in the community? What about bringing the homeless off the streets into the conversations with the experts on homelessness? Because that's what digital does. It allows each of us to equalize, because I think there's been a hierarchy, as Fiona was saying. It's about moving away from the hierarchy and the top-down stuff to recognize that what digital does, when it's done very well, is to create an equalizing power and a redistribution of power so everyone can play in this space, because there's a huge amount of potential resources and ingenuity and creativity waiting to be released. Still 80%, Tony, you talk about this a lot in your tweets around how we still are very, we still see most people not happy or engaged at work. Time to change that. But I think the constraints are of thinking that we only need to have the experts in the room. I think the last thing to say there is that I'm hearing this conversation. This is about opening up, not being closed, opening up into an ecosystem as distinct from single enterprise or a functional group.
Jeremy, how important is language in all of this?
I think language is very important, and I was chatting to some of the guys in the NHS last year in a very frank and open conversation with them, and also this year as they asked me to do some work with them around digital take-up with COVID. And one pivotal moment in that conversation, someone suddenly said, you know what? I've been in the NHS for 20 odd years, and I come to the same conferences and the same conversations with the same people. And I go back and sit with my mates in a pub that night, and I try and explain to them what I was sharing, and they don't understand a single word I'm saying. So my question, so we came up with this idea of, if we're going to engage with the outside world, can our language pass the pub test?
Yeah, good. Excellent. Fiona, a question coming here. Global talent crisis at CXO level, because executives don't necessarily have the mindset. What's your thought?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, right? So it's interesting. If you have a growth mindset, just to go back to that, you actually believe your talent, it's not just innate, that you have ability to grow and change. If you have a fixed mindset, you actually just believe, you're born with the capability, you have talent, intelligence, whatever, right? So it's really interesting, because I've just had a conversation very recently with the CEO, a wonderful CEO, probably late 40s, here in Dublin, of an amazing global company, right? And, he said to me, oh, I'll never get this digital thing, and super smart guy, and, we probably just have to hire millennials and blah, blah, right? So I was saying to him, well, are the millennials going to run the company though? Is that what you mean? They're going to take the C-level roles if you're going to say they're going to deal with this? And he was like, I said, we're not talking about social media here or something. We're actually talking about running the company in a digital era. So you can understand this. I understand it. You can understand it, right? So I actually think there's a huge cognitive barrier at the C-level. Now, it has to be dealt with, because the end result of this is humanity. I mean, big companies lose, and lots of people lose their jobs. It's really important to me, this one, that we get it right. So to answer the question, I think it's a huge challenge, but I think we have to address it for the good of everybody who works in these companies. So it's a moral imperative for the C-level to understand this, or they will go the way of everyone else. All our famous stories, the Kodaks and the Blockbusters, we can roll them all out, right? But that's what awaits us. But that's a choice, is what I'm trying to say. I hope it's a choice. Now, some people would say it's Darwin, you know, it's the dinosaur and the fitter of the species and all that. But still, I can't get over you. But you have all the cash right now and you have all the customers. Why do we have to lose? Why do we have to lose, right? So is it mindset? So I keep going back, it must be mindset, right? Because it's not logical. So I agree. And I think it was an excellent question ever asked that, because it is pivotal that they believe they can, because they can. This is about strategy when I'm talking about C-level now. I'm not talking about the guy who writes the code or the person who does the social media or the whatever comes up with the cloud strategy, right? That's another thing. I'm only talking about the strategy. And I think if you can understand fundamentally what's shifted from industrial era to digital era, break that down simply and understand the mindset you're going to need to play there, then at least you can choose. You may choose to say, no, I'm going the way of Kodak, whatever, because I refuse to see it. But at least if it's simply presented to you in a way, I think you have choice. And that's my hope for the global C-level, but it is not without enormous challenge.
Okay, well, good question coming in from Kathy, which plays into that. Eleanor, what are the baby steps to enable a more positive, proactive growth company culture?
Okay, I've been following the books, the research, the outputs from a group, including a very interesting guy, Robert Keegan, who was an educator. He's retired now, still writing away mad. He's worked with Google, he's worked with, name drop the names, and with another author, Lisa Lahey. He's published a number of books and papers. And his approach strikes me as a really interesting one, not least because one of the last things they came out with was a really interesting book, An Everyone Culture. And in it, they've coined the phrase, a deliberatively developmental organization, a DDO. And in lots of ways, a lot of what's in the latest book is literally just carried on from ideas that were very clear and evident in previous work. But in this particular book, what's great is they take three examples of what they describe as deliberately developmental organizations. And they're in three completely different sectors. There's an asset management, there's a property company, and there's a HR group, I think. And they essentially go through how they're very, very different organizations, but how fundamentally at their core, they are people and development oriented. So very much in terms of what Fiona's talking about the mindset, but it's not just, it's not just talk, it's how the organization operates in small groups, the questions that are asked, the conversations that are had, the metrics that are used in terms of how do they know that they're actually delivering. Well, they actually have conversations and numbers and discussions about what it means to be developing. Because again, in relation to different contexts, or even in terms of how people work and how their attitude and assumptions can change or retrench over time, all of that is put on the table in the organization. And if it's not talked about, if it's not spoken about, if it's assumed away, then we can't be surprised that organizations don't actually deal with those types of issues. So I think it's a great source of examples, but also kind of, the underlying foundations for what it means to be deliberatively developmental.
And Tony, could I just come in on that actually for Eleanor, just to say that actually Lahey and Keegan have hugely influenced me as well. And I just wanted to say that to you because their earlier work, if anyone wants to look at it, it's Immunity to Change, it's called. So that hugely influenced, so we're both on the same page, Eleanor, exactly that body of research. Hugely influenced me around digital mindset because it made me realize one of their big premises is that you need the technical skill, you need the knowledge as well as the mindset. And sometimes in professional development, we over focus on one or the other. Never mindset, it's always behavior and thinking, actually, 90% of it, or technical skill maybe, but we never bring them together. And immunity to change is about, what we're saying here is, I need the actual knowledge to jump if I'm the C-level from industrial era to digital. I absolutely must know things fundamentally that I won't have learned at business school because I did it in the industrial era. So I actually don't know things. So I need to know them. Let's call it the technical skill. And then I need to have the mindset. So Eleanor, great. Like, I haven't heard somebody also be so influenced by that work. So really just wanted to reinforce what Eleanor was saying.
Great, super. Jeremy, if I bring you in on this as well, in terms of, how does an organization then make it psychologically safe for people to develop these mindsets and move forward?
I've been involved in some interesting conversations in the last few months. So it's interesting, we've used the word digital. I mean, most of us have heard the term digital native, but how many people have heard the term social native? And there are two types of technology: digital, which I call the data and the AI and stuff like that. There's also the social media techs and the social collaborative platforms. Ultimate Software is a company in the United States. It's a significant HR tech company rated by Forbes as being the best place in the world to work for in tech, and especially if you're a woman. And 12 months ago, they started up an experiment. They started their social room, where they asked me to come across and to start up their social room with 12 people to coach them how to become social natives around the question, #what breaks your heart? So each of them began to share on social media their conversations around what the world would look like if we were to collaborate at scale around causes that each of them cared about as individuals. And then collectively they formed a shared why, if you like, which was equity at work. And so the #equity at work movement started. So Ultimate have this experiment where they see the future of work as inviting their people to start up or join a social movement of their choice. Can you believe that? And then to say, how can the tech help us to take the journey? But it's not about the tech that's quietly humming in the background. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It's not about the how or the what. It's about the individual why connected with the organizational why. So we've spent 300 years starting with the organization's why, which is a group of crusty old people sitting in a room. No, I'm joking. But we've all been in the boardrooms, right? I love my C-level mates. I love them to bits. But every single human being has got a why, a personal why. So this is about the leadership, the mindset, Fiona, as you're saying, of taking the time to recognize this is #life work. It's not just about work, it's life work now. We're shifting into a journey. Digital is a journey, not just a destination. And so starting with the individual why, as well as the organizational why, connecting together, the #We Nurses movement, as you know, the NHS of the UK started up there, and #Hello, my name is by that wonderful Dr. Granger, and and now it's got thousands of people. They get together in a collaboration on a Monday night. They share across boundaries, and so social and digital, bringing those together is important now. How many organisations have an investment in releasing the social native in their people, as well as the digital native? I think that's an important question.
It's a good question, and I suppose the question for all of you is: are there differences between countries, between cultures, or is this universal?
Don't all of us speak together? That is a very good question.
I can give you.
We've all worked internationally, so
I've got a view.
I think my view, on kind of a simple level, and it isn't this simple, so I know there's more complexity to it, is I think context is critical, right? So what do I mean by that? The environment I'm in, right? It could be in Ireland or America or wherever, i.e. the organization I'm a part of. I think hugely influences my mindset and what I do while I'm inside that. I might do something outside, but what I do inside it. Now, there's definitely cultural characteristics that are going to be different, but I think broad stroke, I think it's all about the context of what organization am I in and what's its behavior, right? And how does it think and do what it does that affects me? Am I able to be my social native? Am I able to unleash my talent on the world, right? Or not? Is that suppressed because of the environment I'm in? So I also know there will be cultural difference because we all have ways of behaving that are different and all that. So I'm not an expert in that. So I'm sure there is more to that, Tony. But broadly speaking, I do think context is the big one.
Yeah, and I think, Fiona, what you're saying is spot on. And I think another way of putting that would be to say that what digital does, digital and social, for the first time in history, challenges and exposes who we are and what we believe in ways that we cannot avoid. We've got away as managers and leaders, I think, from having to avoid these questions up to now. We can no longer do that, which is the point I think we're all saying here in our own different ways. So I think the answer to how it's being taken up in different countries, it is in the context of how open those countries already are or not are to these kind of conversations.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. My thoughts kind of went back to those big monolithic US-based companies and how I think they organize themselves in ways that are more open to a lot of the issues that we're talking about here. And yet we know that's not the case on the ground. My thoughts were also then directed to big dinosaur educational institutions, none in particular, but in general, how difficult it is to get change in those big old organizations as well. And some of it has to do with, you know, the organization and the siloification of different disciplines. It's very difficult to get the mix and the context changing in ways that will actually allow people to collaborate differently. But the social and the technology offers clearly a means for doing that. That's really important.
And in one sentence, we could describe the difference as being in terms of a catalyst towards a because I don't think it's actually about culture. I think it's about conversations now. I think it's about the change of the conversation, and I think the best conversations we've seen as a result of COVID, despite all the messy stuff, right? The best ones are emerging now. The ones where I call the Zoom effect, where we're all equal, we're all at home. The boss can no longer be the boss. He's got or she's got the cat or the dog running all over them. So it's a kind of equalizer. But I think digital shifts at its best. The conversation is about shifting from fear to love.
Okay, and there's a question in here around, you know, some parts of the organization get left dealing with the core legacy. So how do we make sure that the conversation embraces everyone and that everyone is part of that conversation? And another question in that context is, do you need to have some devil's advocates in there? People who are, you know, I think you probably touched on it, Jeremy, in terms of innovation, you know, bring in the people who would not normally be involved, but how do we make sure that this is an inclusive conversation that is really moving the mindset of the organization?
Can I throw an ethical response in at that, really? And it's something that I meet in the educational sphere reasonably regularly. It goes back to assumptions about the self-directedness of learners. And for me, it's the exact same, the self-directedness of people in their organizations. And it's an assumption that is often made, but it's not always true. Not everyone is the same. Some horses you bring to water, they don't want to drink. So there is an ethical issue there about how do we do this to them, which I think we need to be careful about. And I think in terms of the way Jeremy put it there, you know, it sounds very evocative from fear to love, but there's a great economist, Boulding, who was writing exactly about the love economy many years ago. And those conversations, love may not be the sexy word to use in terms of what we're talking about here, but that's essentially it. It's an openness to the other. It's the value of the other people. But they won't all want necessarily what we're talking about. So we have to be fair and reasonable in terms of our conversations.
Okay, cool. I'm just conscious of time. We're coming up near the end. One question I suppose everyone is interested on your views is, who stands out as, you know, having really made the change, and is, you know, someone that we should be looking at as we're saying, wow, these guys are doing really good stuff, and, you know, we should be in that space.
I can go, Tony, just give you, I had thought of a few. I wanted to give an Irish example. You know, I think obviously my lens is traditional. Okay, so the traditional companies, and you know, one that I think is really taking on the challenge here is On Post. You know, and like they only announced the other day their app to compete with Revolut, you know, and I'm just going, right, here's a company that could have said we're dying, we're in post offices, you know what I mean, the whole model's going to die, but they did not. They took a very different mindset. They're much more purpose driven. It's all about the joy they bring to their customer, and you could see it through COVID, how they use that, how they delivered on that. So they're purpose driven. So they're able to manage, they're ambidextrous, they're able to run more than one track at the same time. So they're able to still manage the cash cow and, you know, the old post offices and all that, while it's still got a bit of life in it. They've transitioned hugely into e-commerce, and now they're transitioning totally into the digital economy. So like, here's a little one sitting in Ireland that I just think are a great company, and I think, you know, they're one to watch. You know, I think Microsoft have just gone through a massive transition, right? A rebirth, right? Led with the new CEO. And I think it's really worth a close look at, because they've used the growth mindset, fixed mindset. They've actually used what I'm talking about. So they're a living example of that one. And then one I like as well is the Under Armour gear, you know, that sports gear, because what they've shifted from, instead of defining themselves as being in fitness apparel or whatever, you know, the running gear and all that they wear, they totally looked at purpose and said, no, we're actually in, you know, the health business. You know, we can with the use of technology, aid people to have a much healthier lifestyle. And they have a massive platform, 200,000 people interacting on that. They've brought in others in the ecosystem, smaller companies, allowing them to sell. I mean, they've taken a totally different view of their business. And I don't know what X% revenue they're up in year on year, but it's quite significant. So they were just 3 different examples.
Great. Any others?
I'd love to throw again into the ring the story of Ultimate Software, what they're doing with their social room. Civico, City of Birmingham in the UK, same, starting up a conversation, encouraging their people to start up or join social movements. These are very SMEC tech savvy companies who are starting to engage in a broader conversation around what it means to be fully human at work and in communities. So I've got a couple of articles on that, which would be more than happy to share. I think the best stories are yet to come, and I think it's conversations like this that are important. I think there's an opportunity with COVID now to really sort of see a different configuration of conversations that will take this forward. And I don't think it's just about single enterprise. Thinking about traditionally, is it a single enterprise story? This is about the emerging ecosystems that we're seeing.
Great. Eleanor?
I might have come at it from a different angle, and I think that all of the great examples, and there are many, many of them out there, I think we have a different problem that I would frame, which, you know, in the context of the positive conversation we've had, is probably in the more negative space. But I really think, especially now, given that all of the you know, the most important, substantial, top earning companies are in this tech widely defined sector, I think when you talk about purpose and mindset, we have to be very clear that these organizations that think that the returns to the top earners should be 300 times the average median earnings of people working in the organizations, that is not a sustainable model. It's not a model that respects what everyone brings to work. And you go back 50 years, it was something like 20 to 1. So things have really moved in an uncomfortable direction. And if you have that resharing of the spoils from the benefits, you end up with much better societies because people pay their taxes, and you end up with a much better outcome for all of us. So that's probably in a slightly different space, but I think, again, it's an ethical part of the story.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and some of our audience absolutely agreeing with you. So yeah, listen, guys, on behalf of the Digital Transformation Lab, I want to thank you sincerely. It's been a fantastic discussion. So Fiona, Eleanor, Jeremy, thank you so much. On behalf of the committee, which is led by Dr. Paddy O'Reilly, Jeremy Hayes, Gráinne Bagnall, Antonio Santos, and Ken Russell and myself, we can't thank you enough. And also to thank our audience, everyone who's dialed in today from all over the world. So it's been really fantastic. And thank you all and stay safe.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.